How high's the water, mama? 2 feet high and rising. How high's the water, papa? She said it's 2 feet high and rising. Well, we can make it.
The Red River flows north 545 miles from Wahpeton, North Dakota to Lake Winnipeg in Canada, providing the entire region with the nutrient-rich soil vital to farming in the area, as well as serving as an important historical and economic natural resource. While benefiting towns such as Fargo and Grand Forks, the Red River and its tributaries are prone to spring flooding.
Seasonal flooding has a unique impact on the communities it affects, but in order to comprehend this, we must first understand the process of flooding and how it's dealt with. Flooding occurs when a large body of water rises to uncontainable levels, while often damaging buildings or possibly entire towns. In this case of the Fargo-Moorhead area, these bodies of water are the Red River and its various tributaries, such as the Cheyenne River, which are prone to flooding due to a few major factors.
One of these factors is precipitation. When there's a tremendous amount of snowfall in the duration of winter, not all of it can be absorbed by the Earth's soil. This snow turns into slush in the spring, which in turn transforms into the floodwater that fills the lower-lying areas surrounding the river.
The second contributing factor is that of topography. Due to the lack of geographical dimensions surrounding the river, the melting snow and incoming rainfall is forced to flow into the low points such as the river basin. Unfortunately, the Red and Cheyenne rivers flow through and around much of Fargo, Moorhead, and West Fargo.
The final reason rainwater and snowmelt flows into the lower river basin and doesn't sink into the ground has to do with ground saturation and how frozen the ground is. When little moisture is present, water can easily be absorbed into the ground.
However, as more moisture accumulates in the soil, less water is absorbed and pooling occurs. We can see these factors in action when looking at floods in the past, like the ones from the spring of 1997 and 2009. The 1997 flood can be traced back to 1996, which saw a very wet autumn season, coupled with an early freeze, essentially locking all of the moisture in the ground, until the spring, when the 117 inches of snow, as reported by the KBRR, that the area received through the winter, melted and flowed into the river. The peak river level that spring was just under 40 feet.
The story of the 2009 flood is similar. The ground was almost completely saturated by December when a drastic temperature change of 50 degrees froze the ground before it could dry. The total moisture from the precipitation was more than that of the 1996 to 1997 season. The result was a peak river level of 41 feet, setting a new record above that of the 1997 flood.
So the 2009 Fargo-Moorhead flood peaked just 1 foot over the 1997 flood. 1 foot might not seem like it would make a big difference, but here's a picture of the 2011 Fargo-Moorhead flood with a river level projected at 41 feet. Now here's a picture of the same area, projected at 42 feet. You can see that many more buildings were covered by just an extra foot of water. When river levels are this high, it's clear that every foot counts when it comes to protecting homes and businesses. The question is, how does a city and a community prepare for such a major catastrophe as a flood? We spoke to Colonel Ken Olson, former base commander of the North Dakota Air National Guard and resident of Horace, North Dakota, who has lived through several floods.
How are you affected by the flooding of the rivers in the FM area?
Well, we lived on Forest River Road, which is south of Briarwood, from 1997 through 2010. So we went through, I want to say, 6 different floods, and it was something that we weren't prepared for when we initially moved in there.
What did you personally do to prevent any and all flooding damages that you experienced?
Well, in 1997, our first experience, we sandbagged. I figure we put down about 5,000 sandbags in soil by learning from what folks did down the block, by going to some of the flood preparation meetings that the community had to show you how to do it. We actually did a really good job.
Were any other aspects of your life drastically changed by these damages?
Well, I think, like I mentioned earlier, you get to know your neighbors good, so that was a positive influence, a positive thing. I had to take a lot of time off from work because of that, but also a lot of your workmates come out and help you. So folks that you never would expect, the community comes together and they come and help you out.
Mr. Olson spoke about the personal and community aspects of flood preparation and management. Now we spoke to Ken Krupich, Director of Operations at FM Ambulance during the 2009 flood, who told us how the paramedics prepare for a catastrophic flood event.
What were your responsibilities during the flood preparations as well as throughout the duration of the flood? One of the most challenging pieces was to understand what the trigger points would be to evacuate medical facilities, both long-term care and hospital facilities, as well as a general population evacuation. Anytime you evacuate someone from who's in a vulnerable state like a nursing home or a hospital, it can cause more harm and ultimately death. And so determining when the proper time to do that was so that we were doing it in advance of a dike breach with floodwaters at the facility versus doing a water rescue, which would ultimately lead to injury and illness and possibly death. Probably the most challenging is that all of those types of facilities across the nation are already full. So when you look at a nursing home or you look at a hospital, they're usually at capacity already. So when you look at evacuating multiple nursing homes and hospitals in our community, where do you put all those patients? The challenging part is that we encountered a blizzard to the west of us prior to evacuating those facilities. So we could only go east. And with that, the facilities that we were looking to go to were already at full capacity. So it was a matter of finding not only physical bed space for these patients, but care providers to take care of them once they got there.
Ken Krupich explains how the stresses of disasters bring together communities in their efforts to combat such events.
I think anytime you have a large-scale event, we tend to put our differences aside. And I think the flood of 2009 and 1997, the same thing occurs, is that we all unite for a common purpose, a common goal, and that humanity tends to recognize the importance of support mechanisms. And I think that's one of the things that happened with EMS as well as communities as they band together to support each other.
The problems paramedics face are different from the sandbagging and dike building most people have to worry about, but both struggles require coordination and cooperation, and both bring people together in the face of a giant flood.
Next, we interviewed the Cass County engineer responsible for flood prevention and reaction.
So I'm Jason Benson, the Cass County engineer. During a flood event, I serve as the overall incident commander for flooding for the county.
How many other people do you work with during a flood time event?
So I usually coordinate with a lot of different people, between members of the engineering and public works staff for the city of Fargo, city of West Fargo, cities of Horace and Harwood, Mapleton, and then a lot of the other rural areas that may have kind of community groups for their group of homes, and they may have an actual neighborhood association, so I work with their neighborhood board. In other times, I might just be working with a lot of individual homeowners and then my own staff.
So now we've looked at a personal account of flood preparation, we've looked at the EMT's response, and we've spoken to a professional about how a city prepares. What all three of these have in common is that, in each case, an enormous amount of work is required. It becomes a massive community effort to prevent a flood and to mitigate damages.
Are there any other ways you've seen flooding bring communities together?
I think, especially if you're successful in fighting a flood, I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's really devastating when communities fight to protect their town and then in the end lose, because it's a huge loss not only to them individually but to the community. Being able to come together, bring so many people from so many different backgrounds, different levels of whether it's education or social economic backgrounds. Everybody comes together and stands side by side, throwing sandbags and filling sandbags and helping with bring out food and all of those things. So that sense of volunteerism and community is really big.
What's so unique about the Red River Valley and the towns affected by its flooding is that you don't have to look far to find someone who has been heavily involved in the flooding process. All three of the people we interviewed were connected in some way. Mr. Benson had met with Mr. Olson and Mr. Krupich in preparation of floods in the past. All of this together paints the picture of a recurring disaster that wreaks havoc on the physical community, but it never fails to bring the people living there together.
Now I taught the weeping willow how to cry, and I showed the clouds how to cover up a clear blue sky. And the tears that I cried for that woman are gonna flood you, big river, and I'm gonna sit right here until I die. I met her accidentally in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it tore me up every time I heard her drawl, southern drawl. Then I heard my dream, went back downstream, cavorting in Davenport, and I followed you, baby.